Tier 4. Mount Pyre. Genesect is a modified Kabutops. Genesect is one of the most unique Pokemon out there. The Pokedex entry for this mythical Pokemon states, over 300 million years ago, it was feared as the strongest of hunters. It has been modified by Team Plasma. So it's blatantly stated that this Pokemon was once a dinosaur. And does Genesect look familiar at all? Yeah, it's just Kabutops. Fossil Pokemon, at least in my opinion, are some of the best Pokemon out there. They're super unique, and bringing one back to be a cyborg is an amazing idea for a Pokemon. Coughing in the Holocaust Museum. So if you know, anything about the Holocaust, it's a bit awkward to see a coughing in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Yeah, just an insanely bad spawn for this Pokemon, and it happened at the height of Pokemon Go back in 2016, so this spread over social media and the Pokemon company got in a little bit of trouble over it. Easter egg, snow on Mount Silver. There's a Pokemon creepypasta that centers on Pokemon Silver, specifically Mount Silver, where in the story, the main character ends up battling Red at the top of the mountain after not being able to go back. They were locked at the peak, with the fly ability not letting them leave and not being able to turn back. So they start this battle, but all their Pokemon are dead aside from their Typhlosion that was at 6 health. And every Mon that Red threw out was at 0 health and looked frostbitten. Red's Pokemon all used Struggle, dealing 1 damage to Typhlosion, until it was just Red's frostbitten on the brink of death Pikachu that used Pain Split and killed itself in Typhlosion. After this, the game cut to black, then a picture of this frostbitten Pikachu kept jump scaring the player. It was a pretty decent creepypasta, but got really big because of a fan game that was made off of it, which is what I've been using for footage of this entry. Tentaquill. In 2010, there was a Draw Your Favorite Pokemon with Your Eyes Closed event, and in this event, someone drew a Tentaquill. Everyone was obviously confused because, well, this isn't a real Pokemon, but it ended up becoming a massive meme for Pokemon fans, and people started spreading rumors that it was a leaked Mon for Black and White. Obviously, it wasn't one, it was just some guy's MS Paint drawing, but it was so popular that it ended up getting into multiple Pokemon ROM hacks and somehow even Scribblenauts Unlimited in 2012. What's really interesting about this fake Pokemon is that it may not be fake. There was a leaked ROM of this Space World 97 demo of Pokemon Gold and Silver, and one of the scrap designs for Politoed looks very similar to this Mon. So a big theory is that whoever made Tentaquill may have gone to Space World 97 and sorta just drew their memory of Politoed. In reality, it's not a super unique design. It was probably just some guy messing around on MS Paint, but it's insane how similar they look and how popular this got. Burger King Toy Recall. In a 2-month-long promotion for Pokemon the First Movie, Burger King released a set of 57 Pokemon toys. These toys were contained within containers resembling Pokeballs. Burger King distributed these Pokeballs inside big and regular kids' meals, with a promotion set to last for 56 days. It was one of the biggest promotions in all of fast food history, but had a very bad outcome. On December 11th, 1999, a 13-month-old girl in Sonora, California, named Kira Alexis Murphy, was left alone in her playpen with the ball. One half of the ball attached to her face and formed an airtight seal, causing her to suffocate to death. Following her death, the Tuolumne County Sheriff's Department issued a warning about the containers. This was the first time a Burger King toy was blamed for a death. 2 days later, the Consumer Product Safety Commission asked Burger King to recall the containers, which Burger King refused to do. They said they were afraid to create anxiety for parents as it was too soon to confirm whether the ball was responsible for the child's death, wanting to wait for an independent confirmation of the cause of death. The autopsy results hadn't been completed or released. On December 23rd, an 18-month-old girl in Kansas reportedly got half the ball stuck on her nose and mouth, but her father managed to remove it before she was injured. This resulted in Burger King agreeing to the recall after no resolution had been passed between them and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So yeah, this little Pokeball toy caused a death and almost caused more than just one. A terrible situation overall, but at least Burger King eventually decided to recall it. There's a shockingly large amount of examples of companies just not recalling these harmful products and causing lots of issues. Bill's Garden. In the original Red and Blue games, you could visit Bill's house, and above his house in his backyard, it looked like there was a path to somewhere else, possibly a garden. This sparked tons of rumors of what could possibly be up there. Maybe there was a secret way to get up there, but nothing was ever found. Even if you hack the game to get up there, you're unfortunately just met with patches of land that you can't pass through. Some Pokemon have lots of variations. You've got Pikachu with all the mystery gift hat variations, cosplays. You've got Unknown with a whole 28 variations for all the letters and symbols. Not to mention Arceus, Vivillon, Silvally, Alchemy, there's a lot of variations of some Pokemon, but all of these combined don't even come close to Spinda's. Spinda has so many variations that it has to be actively generated as you encounter the Pokemon. They simply couldn't put all the sprites into a game, so a lot by far. How many variations is there? 4,294,967,296 variations. Yeah, by far the most variations of any Pokemon, and it'll just never be beat. I was extremely curious to see how big on storage it would take for all of these to be a sprite in a game, so I did some math and the average sprite size was about 1.4 kilobytes. So you take that, multiply it by all the Spinda variations, and for every single sprite of Spinda combined, it would be about 6 terabytes of Spinda images. So yeah, makes sense why they had a generator. Clefairy was originally gonna be the series mascot. Clefairy was originally going to be the mascot of Pokemon, but Pikachu was used instead due to the popularity of the anime and Pikachu's familiarity with fans. In the original pilot episode of the anime, Clefairy was intended to be Ash's starting Pokemon. Due to a last-minute change, this role went to Pikachu. This would have made the anime a lot closer to the Pocket Monsters manga, which was later referenced in the episode Lights Camera Up to Action, where the main character Red, along with his Clefairy, starred in a film that Ash and Gary were watching when they were younger. Pokémon Pink. Pokémon Pink version was a planned Pokémon game that was conceptualized some point in the late 90s. This game would have served as a companion title to the released Pokémon Yellow. The existence of Pokémon Pink wouldn't be revealed to the public until April 11th of 2020, when Pokémon Yellow's source code leaked online as part of a larger Giga leak of Nintendo. Right at the top here it mentions a pink version of the game, and this is the only part of the code that ever mentions it, or at least this was the only one that was spread around. But another interesting thing pointing to Pokémon Pink being a thing is in the Japanese release of the Game Boy camera, there's a frame that features Clefairy and Pikachu standing right next to each other, and for Pokémon Pink, this makes sense. Clefairy, after all, was going to be the original mascot of Pokémon, so having a yellow version for Pikachu and pink for Clefairy, yeah, makes sense. Unfortunately though, that's about all the information there is on Pokémon Pink. No ROM or anything since it wasn't really worked on too much. But yeah, Kanto at one point was gonna have 4 original games. Voltorb is a Pokeball haunted by Haunter. There's a pretty popular fan theory that points to Voltorb actually being a trapped Haunter. The theory is that, as mentioned in Voltorb's Pokedex entry, Voltorbs were first sighted at the company that manufactures Pokeballs. And the theory is that possibly defective Pokeballs, such as ones without buttons, would inevitably be scrapped and thrown in some warehouse nearby. And places like empty warehouses is where ghost Pokemon thrive, so in possibly an act of boredom or just messing around, Haunters would be the only Pokemon able to open these balls having their massive claws. So these Haunters would go inside the ball, mess around, somehow share their exact same eyes on the outside of the ball, and what's that? No button to open the ball. So the only way to get out would be using Voltorb's signature move, Self-Destruct. Sure, this theory's a bit out there, it could just be a mon that looks like a Pokeball, but it makes for a good story, and those eyes are just the same. Plus the appearances of them only being after Pokeballs were being made kinda implies that maybe something possessed them in a way, but then again, they're only an electric type, not a ghost at all. So I don't know, kinda makes sense as a theory, makes for a really good story, but has a decent number of holes in it. The true first Pokemon. There's quite a lot of debate over which Pokemon is the true first Pokemon. There's Arceus, that's god of all Pokemon in the lore, Bulbasaur, who's number 1 in the Pokedex, Mew, since its DNA is the base for all other Pokemon in the lore, and Rhydon, the first ever conceptualized Pokemon. I'd say personally, for me it's Rhydon, since if it's the first one ever made, it would be the first Pokemon. But for the lore, I mean, it's gotta be Mew or Arceus. Bulbasaur just happens to be number 1 in the dex. Pokemon-like games. There's been a plethora of games that are like Pokemon. Whether or not directly inspired off of Pokemon is up for debate, though most of these that I'm going to talk about for sure were. There's a lot of creature collector games that are very much like Pokemon, so I'm going to go over a couple. Koromon, which started out as a mobile game but in 2021 came to PC and Switch, feels very classic Pokemon-like. Even has built-in randomizers, which is something Pokemon fans have been asking for years. Another big one is Temtem. Off the bat it's really weird. I mean, it's 3D, but it's designed for multiplayer, so it's a bit of an MMO in a way, which makes it super unique. And of course, there's Digimon, the quote Pokemon copycat, at least back when I was a kid. This game's nothing like Pokemon. If Digimon came out nowadays, I don't think anyone would be making comparisons really. literally. And there's Pal World, which in a way is similar to Pokemon, some ways very similar. It doesn't have its own entry on this Iceberg, which I feel like it kinda deserves, so I'll talk a bit more in depth about it. Pal World's a survival, crafting, open world sorta spin on Pokemon in a way, with guns. That's a big difference. Yeah, very different. You can just shoot Pokemon if you want, pals they're technically called, burn them. I mean, there's no restrictions with this. The main issue people had with this is that the game, for one, was advertised as a spin on Pokemon, which if you know anything about the Pokemon company, you really shouldn't tease them like that. They'll use all their money in legal battles against you, like they did against Palworld. And another big issue was designs of these pals. Most of them are absolutely fine. There's no way you can say some of these creatures look at all alike, but there are for sure some, notably the ones that look like Lucario and Luxray, look way too similar. And okay, sure, that's fine to complain about. I mean, heck, I'm a massive Pokemon fan. I think this is kind of insane. These for sure should not be in Palworld, but look at what Pokemon did. I mean, you could say they copied a lot of designs from Dragon Quest. I'm not blind. I mean, those for sure look very similar. Sure, they are based off real animals, but I mean, I feel like most of the comparisons with Palworld are kind of similar to this. But Palworld did go way too far. Like with Lucario, man, what were you thinking? And lastly, for a game similar to Pokemon, my favorite by far, and one that I highly recommend, is Cassette Beasts. It's got this really nice 2D sprites and 3D environment art style, amazing music, really good original creature design, and even fusion. Plus, evolution works entirely different from Pokemon. So in this, you can have a spring heal, right? Already a good design, but whatever. Instead of evolving, it's called remastering, since, you know, cassette tapes or whatever. I don't know, it's cool. But you can split it into two separate sort of evolution lines. Kind of like how Pokemon has certain lines that aren't just a straight path, like Rockruff, Eevee, Politoed. But it's like this for almost all of these creatures. So you can turn this Spring Heal into either a Hopskin or Snoopin, and after that, those can evolve into a Riptera or Scampire. This one's by far my favorite similar to Pokemon game, and I highly recommend it. The Legend of Dratini. The Legend of Dratini was episode 35 of Pokemon Indigo League. It aired in Asia, but never in the US. The episode revolves around Ash and everyone going to the Safari Zone, and them solving this mystery of where this man's Dratini went, and Team Rocket doing a whole bunch of stuff. But in this episode, well, there's this frame that I have here of Ash having a gun aimed at his head directly, just because the director of the Safari Zone really wanted him to listen to the rules, which is a big thing why this didn't air in the US. But also, Team Rocket used a bomb to get a whole bunch of Pokemon from underneath this lake out of it, and just with how much violence there was, how many weapons were in this episode, it just never aired out of Asia. But speaking of weapons, guns in the Pokemon anime. It's surprising how many times guns and just weapons in general show up in the Pokemon anime. Just in the episodes prior to this Dratini episode, there's RPGs, rifles, missiles, SMGs, knives, sledgehammers, bombs, hunting rifles, and even shurikens. And oddly enough, as far as episodes being banned goes, there's not many banned for having weapons. It's mainly just the Dratini episode. Anime exclusive ball variations. The anime of Pokemon tends to be very different from the games, and the Pokeballs in the anime are no exception. There's tons of Pokeballs in the show that have never shown up in the games, these being the Green Ball, which is just a standard Pokeball but green. It was in the first episode of Indigo League. The starter Pokeballs that just have the names of the starter Pokemon on them. The Pokeball with diamonds, which, at least in my opinion, doesn't look the best. It's fine we didn't get this one. There's Clone Balls, which were from the first Pokemon movie, and these balls would let the user capture any Pokemon even if they were already captured and make clones of them, so makes sense why these aren't in the games. The Crystal Ball from the third movie, and this one was just created from imagination, so it's not even technically real. The Lake Ball, which is supposed to sort of be an alternate to the Park Ball, which doesn't even shake once thrown at a Pokemon, meaning, yeah, this Lake Ball is an instant capture Pokeball. This ball is just like a Master Ball. But the catch is that it's only used during a Sea King catching competition. There's also the Dark Ball, which was in the Pokemon Forever movie that can catch and corrupt any Pokemon it's thrown at, and make it a servant of the person who threw the ball. There's Annie and Oakley's Pokeballs from the Pokemon Heroes movie, which don't act any different, but do look unique. The Fishing Ball, which is a Pokeball with a fish on it. that's all that it is. The GS ball, which was technically available in Pokemon Crystal, but you needed a Japanese copy a long time ago, and not a lot of people even got the chance to obtain this ball. And lastly, there is the Team Rocket ball, which is just another standard Pokeball but painted differently, and it does appear in the card game but none of the video games. Super good looking ball, unfortunate that it was only in the Mewtwo Return Special and never available in the games. Arbok's hood patterns. Arbok's patterns on its skins used to change between games. The first games had a pattern on its back, and then that was immediately removed with Gold and Silver, but from Gens 1 through 4, Arbok would have a new face pattern beneath its head. This stopped with Gen 4 having the last change and still the most up-to-date pattern, but yeah, in a way this was sort of like a first ever regional difference. Pokemon card HP inflation. Aside from rarity of cards sort of increasing with new sets coming out, there's just so many new rarities, it's gonna be hard to pull anything you want. The health and damage have scaled drastically. The whole card game is basically just completely changed. Aside from old cards being banned, this makes every new card better than any old card. So say you're just playing with some friends, if someone has newer cards, they're just gonna do better. But yeah, a quote, good health on a Pokemon went from like 100 to 300. It's insane how much it scaled. Take my favorite evolution for example, Jolteon's first card only had 70 health. Now it's at 110. Ghastly is a dead Cloyster. There's a fan theory that suggests Ghastly is a dead Cloyster, and sure, I see it. Ghastly looks pretty much the exact same as the inner part of a Cloyster, but aside from that, there's really nothing proving this. So really all the Kanto Ghost Pokemon people just believe are dead versions of other mons. And yeah, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, like and subscribe. I hope you have a great rest of your day, week, month, and I'll see you in the next one.